Hey guys, this week our focus is fractions, and hopefully you remember a few things about fractions. One thing would be fractions just means we're taking a whole unit, a whole thing. It could be a candy bar, it could be a taco, it could be pizza, it could be whatever. And there's parts, smaller parts that equals that one whole thing. So if I was to just look at one of these parts, that means it's going to be less than 1. Okay? So right now I have 10 parts that equals this 1. So if I put all these parts together, because it's in the tape diagram, it equals 1. So instead of calling them parts, we need to name these parts. These parts, because there's 10 of these that equals 1 whole, we're going to call them tenths. Now when I say tenths, don't get confused. This is just something that we're counting, just like you count tacos. You can count tacos. I could say this is 1 taco, 2 tacos, 3 tacos, 4 tacos. But instead of saying tacos, we're going to call them tenths. So when I'm counting these parts, that denominator is not just 10. That's just the unit. That denominator just means the size of the part that would make this whole value, this whole tape. So if I broke this into 10 parts, this is the size of it. The size of it's called a tenth. So 1/10, 2/10, and when we say this, it looks like this. Think of it more like this. 1/10, just like we do unit form to make it easier, 2/10, and so on. Okay? So if I was to shade this in, I'm going to shade in 2/10. That means 1/10 plus another of these parts, which is another tenth, we can say is 1/10 plus 1/10 equals 2/10. Now, right now my parts are this size. If I make them smaller equally, but still when I put them all together making 1, so my parts will still be smaller than 1, but they're going to be even smaller than tenths. We're going to make them into hundredths. So I made another tape diagram here, and right now they're the same thing. They're tenths, but instead of doing that, I want them to be smaller. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to take that tenth and break it up into hundredths. Well, I'm going to do it like this. So right now, I'm putting 2 in each of my tenths. So right now I have 20ths. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20 parts that equal my 1 whole. But I want hundredths. So I'm going to put 10 in each of those tenths. 1, 2, 3. And because they're smaller, it's harder to draw. So I'm going to try my best. And it's important to note that I'm doing it to the entire tape, the entire value. 3, we're almost done. Now, even though I have more parts that equal my whole number, look what's happening to the size of one of those parts. It is getting smaller. So the more parts we divide up our 1 into, the smaller they become. So this right here is showing hundredths, because if I counted all this, I would get to 100 parts. If I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Oh, here's another 10. So 10, 20, and if I'm counting them correctly, I'm using my units, 10 hundredths, 20 hundredths, 30 hundredths, 40 hundredths, 50 hundredths, 60 hundredths. Remember, I'm counting my units. These are my units. The denominator just shows the units. 70 hundredths, 80 hundredths, 90 hundredths, 100 hundredths. We reach the end because we have 100 of those pieces. Okay, so let's go back to here. We shaded here, up here, 2/10, 2 of these larger pieces. If I shaded the same amount here, I didn't shade in 2 hundredths. I shaded in 10 20 hundredths. So each one of those tenths became 10 hundredths. So this gets renamed as a different unit, but it's not changing the value of my shaded area. We call this equivalent. This is what the word looks like, equivalent. You can see that it kind of sounds like equal. Okay, so if I change this 2/10 to represent as hundredths instead of tenths, well, I'm looking at, I have 10 in each. If I say 10 in each of my groups, that is, we can represent that with multiplication. So I put 10 in each of these groups, which were called tenths. So 10 in these, so that means 10 groups of 10. And I didn't just do it to these, I did it also to my shaded area. So that 2 is our numerator. Our numerator is just showing how many units are being counted. Well, 2 of these units are being counted. And we broke up those 2 units into groups of 10. I represent that with multiplication. Now, my equivalent fraction is 20 hundredths. Isn't that what our model shows? 2/10 means the same thing as 20 hundredths. This right here shows the same thing as our model, just in an equation form. Okay, so we just looked at that 2/10. Remember, 2 is our numerator that just counts how many units. And our denominator just tells us what is the size of the unit, or how many would make one whole. Okay, and then we said, okay, I can find an equivalent fraction. I don't want tenths anymore. I want smaller pieces. I want to break it up into hundredths, but I still want to keep the same value as 2/10. I'm going to rename it, just like I'm Miss Olson to you, but to my son, I'm Mom. I didn't change. It's just I got renamed. So it means the same thing. Just like 2/10 will mean something the same as hundredths. So we said if we put 10 in each of those parts, we break up those parts that we had, and I make it into 10, put 10 in here. That means 10 equal groups of 10. That also includes the part that was shaded, that was counted. So we would multiply that times 10. You should remember that that should be multiplied by the same number, because it's that whole tape. It's included in that whole tape. So that would equal 20 of those hundredths. So 2/10 is equivalent to 20 hundredths. So guys, if you have any questions about our lesson on doing tenths and hundredths, please, you can do a comment on the this YouTube video, or you can shoot us an email or send a remind message. Hopefully this seems like review. If it doesn't, we've been out for a while, so just keep on working at it. Okay, all right guys, we will talk later, and next week we'll talk about decimals. All right, bye.